the 5-year-old son of Chicago's most feared mafia boss, refused to eat, refused to sleep, refused everyone. Everyone except the maid. Grace Williams had been invisible for 3 years, just another face cleaning a mansion built on blood money. That's exactly how she needed it. Because Grace Williams didn't exist. Not really. The woman scrubbing floors in Vincent Moretti's kitchen was living under a stolen identity, hiding from people who wanted her dead. Her real husband? An FBI agent who died in her arms 4 years ago. Or so she thought. Because when Vincent's 5-year-old son looked up at her with tears streaming down his face and whispered, "Please be my mommy," Grace made a choice that would destroy everything. She said yes. She didn't know Vincent was already investigating her. She didn't know the rival crime family had discovered her location. And she had no idea that the biggest threat wasn't coming from Vincent's enemies. It was coming from the man she'd buried 4 years ago. The man who was about to walk through the door. Alive. What happens when a mafia boss's son only wants the black maid as his mother, and her real identity could start a war that kills them all? Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you are hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, click subscribe and let me know in the comment section where you are watching from, because tomorrow I'll be giving you an interesting story such as this one and you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor of the Moretti mansion, each shard of illumination seeming to whisper secrets that the walls had kept for decades. In the grand foyer, where men in expensive suits spoke in hushed tones about things that would never reach courtrooms, a small boy sat on the bottom step of the sweeping staircase, his dark eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway. 5-year-old Marco Moretti wasn't supposed to be awake at this hour. His father, Vincent Moretti, the man whose very name made grown men tremble from Chicago to New York, had strict rules about bedtimes and boundaries. But Marco had learned early that some rules were worth breaking, especially when it meant catching a glimpse of the only person in this cold mansion who made him feel warm. The kitchen door swung open, and she emerged. Grace Williams moved through the Moretti household like a whisper, present but unobtrusive, efficient but invisible to most eyes. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the harsh lighting of the mansion, making her appear almost ethereal in the late evening shadows. She carried a silver tray, her movements precise and practiced, the result of 3 years serving a family that treated her like furniture. But Marco saw her differently. "Miss Grace," he whispered, his small voice cutting through the murmur of his father's business dealings in the adjacent room. Grace's head turned sharply, her warm brown eyes widening with concern as they found the boy on the stairs. She glanced nervously toward the study where Vincent Moretti's voice rumbled like distant thunder, then quickly crossed to Marco, setting the tray on a side table. "Marco, sweetheart, you should be in bed," she said softly, kneeling before him. Her accent carried the melody of Louisiana, a stark contrast to the sharp Chicago consonants that dominated this house. "I had a bad dream," Marco said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. His dreams were often filled with the sound of his father's anger, the memory of his mother's absence, and the cold emptiness of being 5 years old in a house full of men who dealt in violence. Grace's expression softened. Without hesitation, she sat beside him on the step, and Marco immediately leaned into her, his small body seeking the comfort that no one else in this mansion ever offered. "Want to tell me about it?" she asked, her arm wrapping around his shoulders. Before Marco could answer, heavy footsteps echoed from the study. Grace stiffened, immediately putting professional distance between herself and the boy, but Marco's hand shot out, gripping her uniform sleeve with desperate fingers. Vincent Moretti emerged from the study, flanked by 2 of his associates. He was a man who commanded attention, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that had witnessed things that would break lesser men. Those eyes now landed on his son and the maid, and something flickered across his face. Disapproval? Concern? It vanished too quickly to read. "Marco. Bed. Now." Vincent's voice left no room for negotiation. Marco's grip on Grace's sleeve tightened. "Miss Grace was just. I said now." Vincent's tone didn't rise, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Grace gently extracted her arm from Marco's grasp, giving him a subtle, reassuring nod. "Go on, sweetheart. I'll check on you in the morning. Promise?" Marco's voice was small, vulnerable. "I promise." As Marco reluctantly climbed the stairs, he heard his father's low voice, not quite meant for his ears but audible nonetheless. "Miss Williams, a word. In private." Marco paused at the top of the landing, hidden in shadows, his heart pounding. Through the banister rails, he watched his father dismiss his associates with a gesture, then turn to Grace. She stood perfectly still, her face carefully neutral, the mask she wore to survive in this world. "Mr. Moretti?" Grace's voice was steady, professional. Vincent stepped closer, his presence imposing. "My son has become attached to you. I apologize if I've overstepped, sir. I'll maintain more appropriate boundaries." "That's not what I—" Vincent stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that betrayed unexpected frustration. "Do you know what business I'm in, Miss Williams?" "I know enough not to ask questions, sir." A ghost of something, respect? Amusement, crossed Vincent's face. "My son lost his mother 2 years ago. Cancer. Since then, he's been difficult. Nightmares, tantrums, refusing to eat. The nannies couldn't handle him. But with you." He paused, his jaw tightening. "With you, he smiles." Grace said nothing, but Marco saw her fingers twitch at her sides, a tell of nervousness she probably didn't know she had. "Continue as you have been," Vincent said finally. "But understand this, if you hurt my son, if you disappoint him, if you ever use his affection for you against this family." He left the threat unfinished, hanging in the air like a blade. "I would never hurt that child, Mr. Moretti." Grace's voice carried a steel that Marco had never heard before. "No matter what you think of me, no matter how little I mean in this house, that boy deserves love. And if I'm the only one giving it to him, then that's what I'll do." For a long moment, Vincent stared at her. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into his study, closing the door with a definitive click. Grace stood alone in the foyer, and Marco saw her shoulders sag, saw her hand rise to her chest as she released a breath she'd been holding. In that moment, watching from the shadows, Marco made a silent promise to himself. One day, when he was big enough, strong enough, he would make sure Miss Grace never had to be afraid in this house again. He didn't know that this promise would change everything. He didn't know that Grace Williams carried secrets that could bring his father's empire to its knees. And he certainly didn't know that the woman he desperately wanted as his mother was the last person his father could ever allow into their family. What do you think happens when a child's innocent wish collides with a world built on secrets and power? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Moretti mansion, but Grace had been awake long before dawn broke. She always was. In the small room she occupied on the 3rd floor, once servant quarters, always servant quarters, she'd learned to wake with the first hint of light, to be dressed and ready before the house stirred to life. She stood before the cracked mirror above her dresser, studying her reflection with the critical eye of someone who'd spent years making herself invisible. At 32, Grace Williams carried herself with a quiet dignity that no uniform could diminish. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, not a strand out of place. Her face, free of makeup, showed the fine lines around her eyes, lines earned from too many nights spent worrying, too many days spent surviving. On the dresser sat a small photograph, its edges worn from handling. A younger Grace smiled from the image, her arm around a man in military uniform. Both of them looked impossibly young, impossibly happy. Grace's fingers hovered over the frame, then pulled back. Some mornings, touching it hurt too much. 3 more years, she whispered to her reflection. 3 more years and you'll have enough saved. 3 more years and you can disappear. But even as she said it, she thought of Marco's small hand gripping her sleeve, his desperate eyes seeking comfort only she could provide, and guilt twisted in her chest like a knife. Downstairs, Vincent Moretti sat in his private study, a room that smelled of leather, expensive cigars, and old money. Before him lay a folder marked confidential, but his attention wasn't on business this morning. Instead, he stared at the silver-framed photograph on his desk, his late wife, Isabella, holding their newborn son. "He has your eyes," Vincent murmured to the image, though he'd said these words 1,000 times before. "Your gentleness. God help me, Isabella, I don't know how to be what he needs." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come." His consigliere, Antonio Russo, entered, a man whose loyalty had been forged over 30 years of blood and brotherhood. Antonio was the only person Vincent trusted completely, the only one who'd known him before the Empire, before the weight of command had turned his heart to stone. "We need to talk about the maid," Antonio said without preamble, closing the door behind him. Vincent's jaw tightened. "What about her?" "I ran a background check. Standard procedure for all household staff." Antonio placed a thin folder on the desk. "Her paperwork is clean." "Too clean." "Meaning?" "Meaning Grace Williams barely existed before she showed up in Chicago 3 years ago. Her references check out, her credentials are legitimate, but..." Antonio paused, choosing his words carefully. "It's like she was created, Vincent. Everything about her past is real, but it's surface-level real. There's nothing deeper. No childhood friends, no extended family, no digital footprint before 2020. Vincent opened the folder, scanning the contents. His eyes narrowed. "You think she's law enforcement? FBI plant? I think she's running from something. Or someone." Antonio leaned forward. "The question is, do we care? She's been here 3 years without incident. She's good with Marco. Maybe we let sleeping dogs lie. Nothing in this world is free, Antonio. Everyone wants something." Vincent closed the folder, his mind working through possibilities. "Keep digging." Quietly. "I want to know who Grace Williams really is." What Vincent didn't know was that Grace Williams was already awake in the kitchen, preparing Marco's breakfast with the kind of attention most people reserve for important things. She cut his toast into triangles because he liked the shape, warmed his milk to exactly the right temperature, and arranged fresh strawberries on the side of his plate in a smiley face. These small acts of care had become her lifeline. In a world where she'd lost everything, her husband, her old life, her very identity, Marco's happiness had become the one pure thing she could still create. "Morning, Miss Grace." Grace turned to find Maria, the older housekeeper who'd worked for the Morettis for over 20 years. Maria was round and warm, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Unlike the other staff, who kept their distance from Grace, Maria had taken her under her wing from day one. "Morning, Maria. Coffee's fresh." Maria poured herself a cup, watching Grace arrange Marco's breakfast. "You know, in 20 years, I've never seen that boy attached to anyone the way he's attached to you. Not even his own mother, God rest her soul." Grace's hands stilled. "Maria, I'm just the maid? Please, Nina, I've got eyes." Maria's voice softened. "I also know a woman running from ghosts when I see one. Whatever you're hiding, it's your business. But that boy upstairs? He's not in business. He's a child who lost his mother and found an angel in a maid's uniform." Tears pricked Grace's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back. "I can't get too attached, Maria. This isn't permanent. Nothing in my life can be permanent. Life has a funny way of making liars out of planners," Maria said wisely. Then, more quietly, "Vincent may seem like a monster to the world, but he's a father first. He sees how you are with Marco. That means something in this house." Before Grace could respond, small footsteps thundered down the hallway. Marco burst into the kitchen, his pajamas rumpled, his dark hair sticking up in every direction, and his face lit with pure joy. "Miss Grace!" He launched himself at her, and she caught him instinctively, lifting him into her arms. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep better after I left?" Marco nodded against her shoulder, then pulled back to look at her seriously. "I dreamed you were my real mom. That you lived here forever and ever, and you tucked me in every night, and you never, ever left. Grace's heart cracked. She set him down gently, kneeling to his level. Marco, honey, you know I'm not. I know you're the maid, Marco interrupted, his little face fierce with determination that reminded her painfully of his father. But maids can become moms. I read about it in a story. The prince married the maid and they lived happily ever after. Real life isn't like storybooks, baby. Why not? Marco's eyes filled with tears. Don't you love me? Oh, Marco. Grace pulled him close, her own tears threatening. Of course I love you. So much it scares me. Then why can't you be my mom? Because I'm not who you think I am. Because I'm living under a false identity. Because your father is a criminal and I'm. The kitchen door swung open. Vincent stood there, still in his dress shirt from the previous night, looking exhausted and impossibly dangerous. His eyes took in the scene, his son in the maid's arms, both of them emotional, both of them clinging to each other. Marco, go get dressed. School in an hour. His voice was gentler than Grace expected. But Daddy. Now, son. Marco reluctantly pulled away from Grace, shooting his father a resentful look before trudging out of the kitchen. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Grace stood, wiping her eyes quickly, preparing for dismissal or worse. But Vincent just studied her, his expression unreadable. He calls you Miss Grace, Vincent said finally. Why not just Grace? It's more appropriate, sir. But you let him call you that. You let him get close. Vincent stepped further into the kitchen, and Grace fought the urge to step back. Why? What do you want from my family, Miss Williams? The question hung between them, loaded with suspicion and something else, a father's desperate need to protect his son from yet another loss. Grace met his eyes, and for just a moment, she let him see past her carefully constructed walls. I want nothing from you, Mr. Moretti. But your son? He wanted someone to love him. And I couldn't say no to that, even though I should have. Even though getting attached to anything in this life is the most dangerous thing I could do. Vincent's eyes narrowed. What are you running from, Grace Williams? Grace's breath caught. So he knew. Or suspected. Of course he did. Men like Vincent Moretti didn't survive by being trusting. We're all running from something, Mr. Moretti, she said quietly. Even you. For a long moment, they stood in the kitchen as morning light streamed through the windows, two people carrying secrets too heavy to share, bound together by a 5-year-old boy who just wanted a mother. Vincent turned to leave, then paused at the door. Whatever you're running from, if it comes here, if it threatens my son, I will end it. And you. Do we understand each other? Perfectly, sir. After he left, Grace leaned against the counter, her hands shaking. Maria appeared at her side, pressing a cup of coffee into her hands. That, Maria said softly, is the closest thing to acceptance you'll get from Vincent Moretti. He didn't fire you. In this house, that's practically a blessing. But Grace barely heard her. She was thinking about the burner phone hidden in her mattress, the one that hadn't rung in 3 years. She was thinking about the life she'd fled, the people who might still be looking for her, and the impossibility of staying in one place long enough to matter to anyone. Most of all, she was thinking about Marco's question, why can't you be my mom? And the terrifying truth that she was starting to wish she could be. 3 weeks passed in the Moretti household with an uneasy peace. Grace continued her duties with meticulous care, though she felt Vincent's eyes on her more often now, watching, assessing, waiting for her to slip. Marco's attachment only grew stronger, and despite her better judgment, Grace found herself looking forward to their stolen moments together. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Grace was in Marco's room, helping him with his homework, when she heard the commotion downstairs. Raised voices, the kind that made the staff scatter like birds before a storm. She tensed, her survival instincts, honed from years of running, immediately alert. Miss Grace, what's wrong? Marco looked up from his math worksheet, his dark eyes concerned. Nothing, sweetheart. Keep working on problem 5. I'll be right back. But as Grace reached the bedroom door, it burst open. Vincent stood there, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Behind him, Antonio held a tablet, his expression grave. Marco, go to Maria's room. Now. Vincent's voice was ice. But Daddy. Now. Marco scrambled from his chair, shooting Grace a frightened look as he ran past his father. The door closed behind him with a terrible finality. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. Whatever Vincent had discovered, whatever lie had finally unraveled. Grace Williams, Vincent said, stepping into the room. Antonio followed, closing the door. Want to tell me who you really are? Or should I start? Grace's mind raced through options: deny, deflect, run. But she was 3 floors up in a mansion filled with Vincent's men. There was nowhere to go. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Moretti. Vincent's laugh was bitter. Don't insult my intelligence. Antonio, show her. Antonio turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a photograph, a younger Grace, her hair longer, her smile brighter, standing beside a tall black man in an FBI dress uniform. The caption beneath read, Special Agent Marcus Williams and wife Grace Williams Kincaid attend the Bureau's annual gala. Grace's blood turned to ice. Williams Kincaid, Vincent repeated slowly. You kept part of your real name. Sloppy, for someone trying to disappear. He stepped closer, and Grace saw something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Your husband, Special Agent Marcus Williams, worked organized crime. Specifically, he worked the Calabrese family case. Do you remember them? The family I've been at war with for 5 years? Marcus is dead, Grace whispered, her carefully constructed walls crumbling. He died 4 years ago. In the line of duty, yes. Killed during a raid on a Calabrese drug operation. Vincent's voice was cold. What I want to know is why his widow ended up working as a maid in my house. Was it the FBI who sent you? Are you wearing a wire right now? No. Grace's voice cracked. The FBI doesn't know where I am. Nobody does. Then why are you here? Vincent demanded. Grace closed her eyes, and the memories she'd kept locked away came flooding back. Marcus, bleeding out in her arms. The Calabrese family's threats against her life. The witness protection program that felt like a cage. Her decision to run, to create a new identity on her own terms, to disappear where even the government couldn't find her. Because I had nowhere else to go, she said finally, opening her eyes to meet Vincent's. After Marcus died, the Calabrese family blamed me. They thought I had information, evidence Marcus had hidden. They came after me. The FBI offered protection, but... She laughed bitterly. Protection meant living in a box, under constant surveillance, never being free. So I ran. I became someone else. I took jobs where no one would look twice at a maid, invisible, unremarkable. And you just happened to end up in the house of the Calabrese family's biggest enemy? Antonio interjected skeptically. I didn't know who you were at first, Grace admitted. Not until I'd been here a few weeks. By then, I realized this was actually the safest place I could be. The Calabrese family would never think to look for me in Vincent Moretti's house. And you? She looked at Vincent. You're too smart to hire someone connected to law enforcement knowingly. It was the perfect cover. Vincent studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to the window, staring out at the manicured grounds. Do you have any idea what you've done? If the Calabrese family discovers you're here, they'll assume I'm harboring you deliberately. It could reignite the war we've been carefully avoiding. And if my enemies within the organization find out I've been sheltering an FBI agent's widow. Former FBI agent, Grace corrected quietly. And I'm not asking for your protection, Mr. Moretti. I'll leave tonight. I'll disappear again. Just, please, let me say goodbye to Marco. No. Grace's head snapped up. What? Vincent turned from the window, and the expression on his face was complex: anger, yes, but also something else. Calculation. You leave, and my son will be devastated. He's already lost one mother. I won't let him lose another. But you just said. I said your presence here is dangerous. I didn't say you were leaving. Vincent moved closer, his presence overwhelming. You want to stay invisible? Fine. You stay Grace Williams, the maid. But from now on, you're under my protection. Official protection. Which means you follow my rules, you go nowhere without my approval, and if anyone, FBI, Calabrese, anyone, comes looking for you, you tell me immediately. Grace stared at him, stunned. Why would you do that? Vincent's jaw tightened. Because my son loves you. And I'm tired of watching him cry himself to sleep at night. Before Grace could respond, the door burst open again. One of Vincent's men, a younger soldier named Tommy, stood there, his face pale. Boss, we've got a situation. The Calabrese family just made a move on the South Docks. They're asking for a meeting. Tell them no, Vincent said immediately. They said if you don't meet, they'll start hitting our businesses. They claim they have information about a rat in your organization. Someone connected to the feds. The room went silent. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. Antonio spoke first. They know. Somehow, they know she's here. Vincent's expression darkened. How is that possible? We just found out ourselves. Someone talked, Antonio said grimly. Someone in this house. Grace's mind reeled. For 3 years, she'd been safe. 3 years of carefully constructed anonymity, of being invisible. And now, in a matter of hours, everything was unraveling. I need to leave, she said, her voice stronger now. If I'm gone, you can deny everything. Tell them it was a mistake, that you investigated and found nothing. I can disappear. You can't, Vincent interrupted. If they know you're here, they're already watching the house. You leave now, and you'll be dead before you reach the property line. Then what do you suggest? Grace demanded, fear turning to anger. Because staying here puts Marco in danger, and that's something I won't do. Vincent turned to Antonio. Call our people. I want full security on the house. No one in or out without my approval. And find out who leaked the information. Vincent, if we go to war with the Calabrese family over this, Antonio began. Then we go to war. Vincent's voice was final. He looked at Grace. You're part of this family now, whether you planned it or not. And I protect my family. The door opened again, and this time it was Marco who appeared, having escaped from Maria. His small face was tear-streaked, his eyes wide with fear. Daddy, why is everyone yelling? Why are you mad at Miss Grace? The sight of him broke something in Grace. She moved without thinking, scooping him into her arms. It's okay, baby. Everything's going to be okay. But as she held him, she met Vincent's eyes over Marco's head, and she saw the truth reflected there: nothing was okay. Her past had finally caught up with her, and now everyone she'd come to care about was in danger. Miss Grace, you're not leaving, are you? Marco whispered against her shoulder. Please don't leave me. Please. Grace's throat tightened. She looked at Vincent, silently asking for guidance. He gave a short nod. I'm not leaving, sweetheart, Grace said softly, though the words felt like both a promise and a death sentence. I'm staying right here. What she didn't say was that staying might cost all of them everything. What she didn't know was that Vincent had already made a decision, one that would change the trajectory of all their lives. He would protect her, not just for Marco's sake, but because something in Grace Williams Kincaid called to the man he'd been before the world had turned him hard. Something that reminded him what it felt like to care about someone beyond duty or family obligation. And in that moment, with Marco clinging to Grace and Vincent watching them both, 3 lives became irrevocably intertwined. The Calabrese family wanted war. They'd get one. But this time, Vincent Moretti had something worth fighting for beyond territory and power. He had a son who'd finally found happiness. And a woman who'd reminded him what it meant to have something to lose. The Moretti mansion transformed into a fortress overnight. Armed guards patrolled the grounds, security cameras appeared in every corner, and Grace found herself unable to move through the house without an escort. What had once been her sanctuary, the quiet kitchen, Marco's cheerful bedroom, the garden where she'd found solace, now felt like a gilded cage. But it was Marco who suffered most from the changes. "Why can't I go to school?" he demanded for the third morning in a row, his small face flushed with frustration. "All my friends are there." Vincent knelt before his son, his expression softer than Grace had ever seen it. "It's just for a little while, buddy. Until Daddy makes sure everything is safe." "Safe from what?" Marco's lower lip trembled. "Is it because of Miss Grace? Are the bad men coming because of her?" Grace, standing in the doorway, felt her heart shatter. This was exactly what she'd feared, Marco caught in the crossfire of a world he was too young to understand. Vincent's eyes found hers, and for a moment, she saw his struggle. Then he pulled Marco close. "The bad men are coming because they're bad, Marco. Not because of Miss Grace. She's family now, and we protect the family. That's what Morettis do." "Family?" Marco pulled back, his eyes wide and suddenly hopeful. "So Miss Grace is staying forever? Like a real mom?" Vincent hesitated, and Grace saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of truth against comfort, reality against a child's desperate wish. "We're keeping her safe," Vincent said finally. "That's what matters right now." It wasn't the answer Marco wanted, but it was honest. He threw his arms around his father, then ran to Grace, hugging her waist fiercely. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Miss Grace. I'll protect you too." Grace's throat tightened. She stroked his hair, blinking back tears. "I know you will, brave boy." After Marco went with Maria to start his home lessons, Vincent lingered in the hallway with Grace. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated the exhaustion on his face. He clearly hadn't slept. "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "For what you told him. For calling me family. I didn't do it for you." Vincent's voice was gruff, but there was no real edge to it. "I did it for him." "I know." Grace paused, then added, "I'm sorry. For bringing this into your home. For putting him at risk." Vincent studied her for a long moment. "You know what I've realized, Miss Williams? You've been running for years, always apologizing for existing, for taking up space. But my son doesn't see you as a problem. He sees you as the person who makes him feel safe." He stepped closer, and Grace caught the scent of his cologne, cedar and something darker. "Maybe it's time you stopped apologizing for being alive." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. Before she could respond, Vincent walked away, leaving her standing alone in the hallway, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That evening, Vincent called an emergency meeting in his study. Grace wasn't invited, but she could hear the raised voices through the thick oak door as she passed by with fresh coffee for the men inside. "Absolutely insane." That was Antonio's voice, sharp with frustration. "You're risking everything for a woman you barely know." "I know enough." Vincent's tone brooked no argument. "Do you?" "Because I've been looking deeper into Grace Williams Kincaid's past, and there are holes, Vincent. Big ones. 3 months before her husband died, she disappeared from public record. No credit cards, no social media, nothing. Where was she?" Grace's hand trembled, nearly spilling the coffee. She knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission, a breach of protocol that would normally earn a reprimand, but right now, she needed to control this narrative. 4 men sat around Vincent's desk, Vincent, Antonio, and 2 captains Grace recognized but didn't know by name. All of them turned to look at her. "I can answer that question," Grace said, setting the tray down with more force than necessary. "If you're going to dig into my past, at least have the courtesy to ask me directly." Antonio's eyes narrowed. This is a private meeting. About me. Which makes it my business. Grace turned to Vincent. 3 months before Marcus died, I was in a private psychiatric facility. The room went silent. Grace continued, her voice steady despite the shame burning in her chest. I had a breakdown. Depression, anxiety, PTSD from years of living as a federal agent's wife, never knowing if he'd come home, always looking over my shoulder. Marcus had me admitted voluntarily. I spent 12 weeks there, off the grid, getting help. She met Antonio's gaze. That's your hole. That's what you couldn't find. Vincent's expression was unreadable. Why didn't you mention this before? Because people hear psychiatric facility and they assume you're unstable, unreliable. I've spent years proving I'm neither. Grace's hands clenched at her sides. But if you want me gone, if this changes things. It doesn't. Vincent stood, moving around the desk. But it does explain why you're so determined to protect my son. You know what it's like to need protection. The understanding in his voice nearly undid her. Grace blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of these men. Sir, with all due respect, one of the captains spoke up, a younger man named Luca. The Calabrese family is demanding the meeting. If we don't show, they'll escalate. People will die. Then we meet, Vincent said decisively. But on our terms. Antonio, arrange it for tomorrow night. Neutral ground. I want every precaution in place. What about her? Antonio gestured to Grace. She stays here. Under guard. Vincent looked at Grace. You don't leave this house for any reason. Understand? Grace nodded, but her mind was racing. If Vincent met with the Calabrese family, if things went wrong, Marco would lose his father. And despite everything, despite the danger and the lies and the impossible situation, Grace realized she couldn't bear the thought of Vincent dying. When did that happen? When had the cold Mafia boss become someone she worried about? Later that night, Grace couldn't sleep. She wandered down to the kitchen at 2 a.m., seeking the comfort of routine, something to do with her hands, some way to quiet her racing thoughts. She was surprised to find Vincent already there, sitting at the island with a glass of whiskey, still in his dress shirt from earlier, his tie loosened. Couldn't sleep either, he asked without looking up. Grace hesitated, then poured herself water and sat across from him. Too much on my mind. Join the club. Vincent took a sip of his drink, then studied her in the dim light. You know, Isabella, my wife, she used to come down here when she couldn't sleep. Said the kitchen was the heart of a home. It was the first time he'd voluntarily spoken about his late wife to Grace. She stayed quiet, sensing he needed to talk. She would have liked you, Vincent continued. She always said Marco needed someone who'd fight for him, not just take care of him. Someone with a spine. He smiled faintly. You've got a spine, Grace Williams. So did she, I'm guessing. She had fire. Vincent's smile faded. Cancer took it slowly, piece by piece. By the end, she could barely recognize Marco. That's when she made me promise that I'd make sure he grew up knowing what love looked like, not just loyalty and duty. Grace's chest tightened. You're a good father, Vincent. It was the first time she'd used his first name, and they both noticed. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Am I? Vincent's voice was rough. I'm raising a boy in a world of violence. Teaching him to be hard when you've shown him it's okay to be soft. You've given him more in 3 years than I've given him in 5. That's not true. It is. Vincent stood, moving around the island until he was standing beside her. He laughs with you. Really laughs. He tells you his dreams, his fears. With me, he's always trying to be strong, trying to be the man he thinks I want him to be. Grace looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. He loves you, Vincent. He's trying to be strong because he sees how strong you are. He wants to make you proud. I'm already proud of him. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. I just don't know how to show him. Without thinking, Grace reached out and took his hand. The touch was electric, inappropriate, dangerous, and yet neither of them pulled away. Start by telling him, Grace said softly. Tell him what you just told me. He needs to hear it. Vincent's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible coming from a man whose reputation was built on violence. How did you get so wise? Therapy, Grace said with a small smile. Lots and lots of therapy. Vincent laughed, a real laugh, warm and unexpected. The sound transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Grace found herself staring, memorizing this moment. I should go, she said, though she didn't move. Probably, Vincent agreed, but his hand tightened on hers. They stood there in the darkened kitchen, connected by touch and circumstance and something neither of them dared acknowledge. Then Vincent slowly released her hand and stepped back. Get some sleep, Grace. Tomorrow will be difficult. Vincent, she paused, unsure what she wanted to say. Be careful. At the meeting. Marco needs you. And? She swallowed hard. So do I. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Vincent's expression softened. I have no intention of dying, Grace. Not when I finally have something worth living for. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her racing heart and the terrifying realization that she was falling for Vincent Moretti. The next morning brought new complications. Grace was helping Marco with his reading when Maria burst into the room, her face pale. Grace, you need to come. Now. In the kitchen, the entire staff was gathered around Antonio, who held his phone out. On the screen was a news article, FBI reopens investigation into William's death, widow sought for questioning. Grace's world tilted. What? The FBI just announced they believe Marcus Williams' death wasn't just a casualty of the raid, Antonio explained grimly. They think there was a leak inside the bureau that led to his ambush. They want to question you about it. They think I was the leak? Grace's voice was hollow. They're not saying that explicitly. But they're looking for you. And if they find you here... Antonio didn't need to finish the sentence. If the FBI discovered Grace in Vincent's house, it would look like collusion. It could bring down the entire organization. This is perfect timing, Grace said bitterly. The Calabrese family leaks my identity, and now the FBI is looking for me. Someone is playing chess with our lives. The question is who, Vincent said from the doorway. No one had heard him enter. His eyes were dark with anger. And why now? Tommy, the young soldier, spoke up from the corner. Boss, maybe it's not about her. Maybe someone's trying to distract you before the meeting tonight. Get you off balance. Vincent's eyes sharpened. You might be right. He turned to Grace. Pack a bag. Just essentials. What? Why? Because if the FBI shows up with a warrant, I need to be able to say truthfully that you're not here. Antonio, take her to the safe house upstate. You leave in 1 hour. No. The shout came from the doorway. Marco stood there, having followed Maria. His face was stricken. You can't take Miss Grace away. You promised she was family. You promised. Grace rushed to him, kneeling down. Marco, sweetheart, it's just for a little while. That's what Mommy said. Marco was crying now, his small body shaking. She said she was just going to the hospital for a little while, and then she never came back. You're lying. Everyone lies. The words cut through the room like a knife. Vincent crossed to his son in 3 strides, pulling him into his arms. Marco, listen to me. Miss Grace is coming back. I swear it. On my life, I swear it. You can't promise that. Marco sobbed against his father's shoulder. Bad things happen. People leave. Grace felt her own tears falling. She looked at Vincent, and in his eyes, she saw her own anguish reflected back. They'd both survived so much, fought so hard to protect this child, and now their efforts were tearing him apart. "Vincent," Grace said quietly. "I can't go. I can't do that to him. If you stay, then I stay and we deal with whatever comes. Together." Grace stood, her decision made. "I'm done running. I'm done letting fear control my life. If the FBI wants me, if the Calabrese family wants me, let them come. But I'm not leaving Marco. Not voluntarily. Not ever." Vincent stared at her, and Grace saw the moment something shifted in him, the moment he stopped seeing her as a problem to be managed and started seeing her as an equal, a partner. "Then you stay," he said finally. "But Marco comes with us to the meeting tonight." "What?" Antonio looked shocked. "Vincent, you can't bring your son to a sit-down with the Calabrese family." "I can and I will. They want to see weakness. They'll see a father protecting his family. All of it." Vincent's voice was steel. "Grace, you too. We go together, as a united front. Let them see that whatever games they're playing, we're not afraid." It was possibly the most reckless thing Vincent could do, bringing both his son and the woman he was protecting to a meeting with his enemies. But Grace understood the strategy. It was a power move, a statement that said they had nothing to hide and no fear of consequences. It was also incredibly dangerous. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked. Vincent looked at her, then at his son, still clutching his neck. "I've never been more sure of anything. We're a family now. For better or worse. And families stand together." Marco lifted his head from his father's shoulder, looking between his father and Grace with hope dawning on his tear-stained face. "Really? Is Miss Grace really family?" "Really," Vincent confirmed. And in that moment, despite the danger, despite the impossible circumstances, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she belonged somewhere. Even if that somewhere was the most dangerous place she could possibly be. The restaurant sat on neutral ground, a place where neither the Morettis nor the Calabrese family held dominion. It was upscale, quiet, the kind of establishment where million-dollar deals were made over wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Vincent had reserved the entire back room. Grace sat beside Marco in the car, her hand gripping his small one tightly. Across from them, Vincent was composed, controlled, the powerful boss everyone feared. But Grace had learned to read the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed once against his knee before going still. "Remember what we discussed," Vincent said, looking at Marco. "You stay close to Miss Grace. You don't speak unless spoken to. And if I tell you to leave, you go with Antonio immediately. No arguments." "Yes, Daddy." Marco's voice was small but brave. Vincent's eyes moved to Grace. "Are you sure about this?" Grace nodded, though her heart hammered in her chest. "We're family, remember? We do this together." Something flickered in Vincent's expression, warmth, gratitude, and something deeper that made Grace's breath catch. The restaurant was elegant and hushed. They were escorted to the private room where 5 men already waited. Grace recognized Carlo Calabrese immediately, older than Vincent, silver-haired, with the kind of cold eyes that had witnessed countless deaths and felt nothing. But it was the man sitting beside Carlo who made Grace's world stop. Marcus. Her husband. Her dead husband. Very much alive and sitting at the table. The room spun. Grace's knees buckled, and only Vincent's quick reflexes kept her upright. His arm wrapped around her waist, steadying her, his voice low and urgent in her ear. "Grace? What's wrong?" She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Marcus's eyes met hers across the room, and she saw calculation there, not surprise. He'd known she'd be here. He'd planned this. "Ah," Carlo Calabrese said, his voice oily with satisfaction. "I see Mrs. Williams recognizes our guest. Or should I say, Special Agent Marcus Williams. Still very much in the service of the FBI." Vincent's entire body went rigid. His arm tightened around Grace protectively as his mind worked through the implications. Someone wants to explain what the hell is going on. Marcus stood slowly, and Grace noticed he moved differently, harder, colder than the man she'd married. Hello, Grace. It's been a long time. You died. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. I held you. You were bleeding. You died in my arms. Tactical blood packs. Very convincing. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. The Bureau needed me dead to complete my deep cover operation. You were collateral damage in that plan. The words hit Grace like physical blows. Collateral damage? Marcus, I grieved you. I broke down. I lost everything. Yes, the psychiatric facility. Marcus tilted his head. I read the reports. I'm sorry you couldn't handle the pressure, Grace. But my mission was too important. Vincent's voice cut through the room like a blade. Get to the point, Calabrese. Why are we here? Carlo leaned back in his chair, enjoying himself. Agent Williams has been working with our family for the past 4 years, feeding us information about our enemies, including you, Mr. Moretti. In exchange, we've provided him with intelligence on various criminal organizations. A mutually beneficial arrangement. You're working with them? Grace stared at Marcus, horror and betrayal washing over her. The Calabrese family killed innocent people. They traffic drugs, weapons. They provide information that has saved hundreds of lives, Marcus interrupted coldly. My methods may be unconventional, but they're effective. The Bureau knows and approves. Does the Bureau know you faked your death and destroyed your wife? Vincent's voice was deadly quiet. My wife signed up for the life of a federal agent's spouse. She knew the risks. She was supposed to be your partner, not your asset. Vincent's arm remained around Grace, a clear statement of protection. Why reveal yourself now? What do you want? Carlo answered, simple. Agent Williams wants his wife back. And we want you to hand her over. Grace's blood ran cold. Marco, sensing the danger, pressed closer to her side. That's not happening, Vincent said flatly. Then we have a problem, Carlo said. Because Agent Williams has been very helpful to us. And in exchange for his continued cooperation, we promised to help him recover his property. I'm not property, Grace said, finding her voice. The shock was giving way to anger, hot, fierce anger at the man who'd let her believe he was dead, who'd watched her suffer, who'd stolen 4 years of her life. And I'm not going anywhere with you, Marcus. Marcus's expression hardened. Grace, don't be difficult. You're still my wife legally. You belong. She belongs to no one. Vincent's interruption was sharp. Least of all a man who treated her like an expendable asset in his operation. This is bigger than hurt feelings, Marcus snapped. Grace has information I need. Before I died, I was investigating a leak inside the FBI, someone who was selling information to the Calabrese family. I was close to identifying them when the operation went active. Grace, you remember the files I kept at home? The encrypted drive I asked you to hold? Grace's mind raced back. She did remember a small external drive Marcus had given her 3 months before his supposed death, asking her to keep it safe, not to look at it. I don't have it anymore, Grace said. Everything was seized after you died. The FBI took all your files, all your equipment. Not everything. Marcus leaned forward. I know you, Grace. You're careful. Paranoid. You would have hidden something that important. Where is it? Grace's silence was answer enough. She doesn't have to tell you anything, Vincent said. This meeting is over. Not quite. Carlo gestured to one of his men, who opened a laptop and turned it toward them. On the screen was surveillance footage, Maria, the Moretti housekeeper, meeting with a man Grace didn't recognize. Money changed hands. Papers were exchanged. Antonio swore under his breath. Maria? She's been with your family for 20 years, Vincent. 20 years of loyalty, Carlo confirmed, until Agent Williams convinced her that you were harboring a federal fugitive. Maria thought she was doing the right thing, informing on Grace's presence. She had no idea she was actually helping us. Vincent's face had gone cold, all emotion locked away behind his boss persona. But Grace felt the tension in his body, and saw the betrayal flickering in his eyes. Maria had been like family. Here's how this will work, Carlo continued. Grace comes with us. She provides Agent Williams with the encrypted drive. In exchange, we don't reveal to the FBI that Vincent Moretti has been hiding a witness. We don't tell the other families that you've gone soft, protecting a Fed's wife. And most importantly, his eyes drifted to Marco, who clutched Grace's hand. We don't target your son. The threat hung in the air, ugly and explicit. Marco whispered, Miss Grace? His voice trembled with fear. Grace looked down at the boy, the child she'd come to love as her own. Then at Vincent, seeing the impossible choice written on his face, his organization's safety in his son's life, or the woman who'd brought light back into their darkness. I'll go, Grace said quietly. No. Vincent's response was immediate. Vincent, they threatened Marco. I don't care. Vincent turned to face her fully, his hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. We don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't give in to threats. And we sure as hell don't give up family. How touching, Marcus said dryly. But you're not thinking clearly, Moretti. Grace is my wife. Whatever feelings you think you have for her are none of your damn business, Vincent finished. You gave up any claim to Grace when you let her believe you were dead. When you sacrificed her mental health for your operation. When you stood by while she suffered. He turned back to Carlo. You want a war? You'll have one. But Grace stays with me. Carlo's smile faded. You're making a mistake. No. I'm making a choice. Vincent stood, pulling Grace and Marco with him. The difference is, I'm choosing to protect the people I care about instead of using them as pawns. Something Agent Williams clearly never learned. Marcus stood too, his face flushing with anger. Grace, think about this. Think about what you're giving up. I'm your husband. We took vows. Vows you broke when you faked your death. Grace's voice cracked. You let me think I lost you. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I wanted to die, Marcus. I spent weeks in that facility wanting to die because living without you hurt too much. And you were alive. You were alive and you let me suffer. For the first time, something like guilt flickered across Marcus's face. It was necessary. It was cruel. Grace stepped closer to Vincent, making her choice clear. Whatever we had died 4 years ago. Not because you died, but because you were willing to destroy me for your mission. Vincent would never do that. Vincent protects the people he loves. The word hung between them, love. Neither Grace nor Vincent had said it explicitly before, but now it was out there, undeniable. You love him? Marcus's voice was incredulous. He's a criminal, Grace. A murderer. Everything we fought against. He's a better man than you ever were, Grace said quietly. Because when it mattered, when the choice was between his empire and my safety, he chose me. You would have chosen the mission. Silence fell over the room. Then Carlo laughed, a cold, amused sound. Well, this is unexpected. Agent Williams, it seems your wife has moved on. This isn't over, Marcus said, his eyes hard. Grace, that drive contains evidence that could take down half the FBI's corrupt agents. People will die if it falls into the wrong hands. Then maybe you shouldn't have trusted your wife with it before faking your death, Vincent said coldly. He guided Grace and Marco toward the door, Antonio and his men forming a protective barrier. Moretti. Carlo called out. You walk out that door, and the Calabrese family considers this an act of war. Vincent paused, looked back over his shoulder. Then consider it an act of war. But know this, you threaten my family again, and I won't just fight back. I'll erase you from existence. They left the restaurant in tense silence, moving quickly to the cars. Once inside, with the doors locked and the convoy moving, Marco burst into tears. I was so scared, he sobbed. They wanted to take Miss Grace away. They wanted to hurt us. Grace pulled him into her lap, holding him close while her own tears fell. Vincent sat across from them, his hand finding Grace's knee, grounding her. You stood up to them, Grace whispered to Vincent. You risked everything. For you, Vincent finished. I risked everything for you. For both of you. His eyes met hers, intense and honest. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the maid and became the woman he paused, glancing at Marco. The woman you love? Grace finished for him, her voice barely audible. Vincent's hand tightened on her knee. Yes. Marco lifted his head, looking between them with wide eyes. Does that mean Miss Grace is really going to be my mom? Like, for real forever? Vincent and Grace looked at each other, and Grace saw her own fear and hope reflected in his eyes. They'd just declared war on one of the most powerful crime families in the country. Marcus and the FBI would be hunting them. Everything was falling apart. But somehow, in the midst of the chaos, they'd found something worth fighting for. Yeah, buddy, Vincent said softly, his eyes never leaving Grace's. For real forever. Grace leaned forward, and Vincent met her halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that sealed a promise neither of them knew if they could keep. But they would try. They would fight for it. Because love, real love, was worth any risk. Even if it meant going to war with the world. The safe house was a concrete bunker disguised as a suburban home, located 2 hours outside the city. Vincent had moved Grace, Marco, and a small team of his most trusted men there within hours of the disastrous meeting. War had been declared, and the Moretti mansion was no longer safe. Grace sat on the edge of a narrow bed, staring at the burner phone in her hands. Outside the locked bedroom, she could hear Vincent's voice, sharp, commanding, coordinating defenses and planning counterattacks. Inside, she felt like she was suffocating. Everything she touched turned to ash. Marcus was alive. The man she'd mourned, the man whose death had broken her, alive and working with criminals. And now, because of her, Vincent and Marco were targets. The Calabrese family would come for them. The FBI would come for her. And somewhere in the crossfire, innocent people would die. The door opened. Vincent entered, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. He'd been awake for 36 hours straight. Marco's finally asleep, he said, sitting beside her on the bed. Antonio's watching him. Grace nodded but couldn't meet his eyes. Grace. Vincent's hand found hers. Talk to me. I should leave, she whispered. Tonight, while everyone's distracted. I can disappear again, take the heat with me. No. Vincent's grip tightened. We've been through this. People are going to die because of me, Vincent. Your people. Maybe even Marco. Marco is safer with you here than without you, Vincent interrupted. You're the only person besides me that he trusts completely. If you leave, it'll destroy him. But if I stay. If you stay, we will fight together. As a family. Vincent cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. I meant what I said at that restaurant. I love you, Grace. Not because you're convenient, not because Marco needs a mother. I love you because you're strong and brave and you make me want to be a better man. Tears streamed down Grace's face. I love you too. That's why I have to go. I can't watch you die protecting me. Vincent kissed her, desperate, fierce, a kiss that tasted like goodbye. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. Then we make sure nobody dies. We will end this. How? The Calabrese family wants war. Marcus wants to drive. We can't fight on two fronts. Then we don't fight. We negotiate. Vincent stood, pulling out his phone. You said that drive contains evidence of FBI corruption. Names, transactions, proof of illegal activities. Grace nodded. Marcus said it could take down half the bureau. Then that's our leverage. We give the Calabrese family what they really want, protection from federal prosecution. We give Marcus what he wants, the corrupt agents exposed. And in exchange, they leave us alone. You think they'll agree to that? I think everyone has a price. We just need to find theirs. Vincent's jaw set with determination. But first, I need you to tell me where that drive is. Grace hesitated. The drive was her insurance policy, her last bargaining chip. Giving it up meant trusting Vincent completely, putting her life entirely in his hands. She took a breath. My storage unit. The one I rented under my real name before I became Grace Williams. It's in a safe deposit box there. Vincent made a call, speaking rapidly in Italian to someone on the other end. When he hung up, he looked at Grace. We'll have it by morning. Then we set up a meeting, all parties present. We end this once and for all. And if they don't agree? Vincent's expression hardened. Then we go to war. And I will burn their entire world down to keep you safe. But morning brought disaster instead of hope. Grace woke to shouting, Antonio's voice raised in panic, Vincent cursing in Italian. She ran from the bedroom to find chaos. The safe house's security monitors showed FBI vehicles surrounding the property, agents in tactical gear taking positions. How did they find us? Vincent demanded. Antonio's face was ashen. I don't know. This location is off-grid, completely secure. Someone talked, Grace said quietly. She felt numb, resigned. They always do. Vincent turned to her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing options, running scenarios. Grace, there's a tunnel under the house. It leads to the woods half a mile away. Antonio can get you and Marco out. No. Grace's voice was firm. I'm done running, remember? Besides, they're here for me. If I go out there, surrender myself, they'll leave you alone. Absolutely not. Vincent, look at the monitors. They have Marco's bedroom surrounded. If there's shooting, if anything happens, her voice broke. I can't let him get hurt because of me. Marco appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. What's happening? Why are there police? Grace's heart shattered. She knelt before him, pulling him close. Baby, I need you to be brave for me, okay? Those men outside, they're here because of something I did a long time ago. I need to go with them. No. Marco's arms locked around her neck. You promised you wouldn't leave. Daddy, don't let them take her. Vincent's face was a mask of anguish. Grace had never seen him look so helpless, so broken. A loudspeaker crackled outside. Grace Williams Kincaid, this is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands up. Grace gently extracted Marco's arms, handing him to Vincent. Take care of him. Tell him I loved being his almost mom. Grace, Vincent's voice was raw. I love you, she said simply. Then, before anyone could stop her, she walked to the front door. Grace, wait. Antonio called. There's something you need to see first. He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a news broadcast, FBI agent arrested for corruption, Special Agent Marcus Williams taken into custody following anonymous tip. Grace's breath caught. The footage showed Marcus in handcuffs, being led from a federal building. The news anchor continued, sources say Williams was working as a double agent, providing classified information to organized crime in exchange for. The broadcast was interrupted by gunfire outside. Not from the FBI. From somewhere else. Vincent swore, pulling Grace and Marco away from the windows. That's not FBI tactics. Someone else is here. The monitors showed new vehicles arriving, black SUVs with no markings. Men in tactical gear engaged the FBI agents in a firefight. It was chaos, professional and deadly. Calabrese, Antonio identified. They're hitting both groups. Grace understood with horrifying clarity. The Calabrese family didn't want her arrested by the FBI, they wanted her dead. Without Grace, Vincent had no leverage. Without the drive's location, they could eliminate a potential threat. The tunnel, Vincent ordered. Now. All of us. They ran, Vincent carrying Marco, Antonio leading, Grace bringing up the rear. Behind them, gunfire intensified. The safe house was being torn apart by two forces, neither of which cared if a 5-year-old boy was caught in the crossfire. The tunnel was dark, damp, and endless. Grace's lungs burned as they ran. Behind them, explosions rocked the house. They emerged in the woods just as the safe house erupted in flames. Marco was crying, clinging to his father. Grace's hands shook with adrenaline. They'd barely escaped with their lives. "Where do we go?" she asked Vincent. He looked at her, and she saw the truth in his eyes. They had nowhere to go. No safe houses that weren't compromised. No allies they could trust completely. They were hunted by the FBI, the Calabrese family, and anyone else who wanted leverage over Vincent Moretti. "We end this," Vincent said grimly. "Tonight. I'm calling a summit, everyone at the table. Calabrese, my organization, every family with a stake in this. And we settle it once and for all." "They'll kill you," Grace said. "Maybe. But I'm not living like this anymore. Neither are you." Vincent pulled her close, kissed her forehead. "Whatever happens tonight, know that loving you was worth it. Every second was worth it." Grace closed her eyes, memorizing the feel of his arms around her, the warmth of Marco between them. This might be the last moment of peace they ever had. And she refused to waste it on fear. The summit was held in the most unexpected place, a church. Vincent had chosen sacred ground deliberately, a place where even criminals hesitated to spill blood. The old cathedral sat empty at midnight, its stained glass windows casting colored shadows across the pews. Representatives from every major family sat in attendance, along with 2 FBI officials who'd arrived under promise of immunity. Grace stood beside Vincent at the altar, Marco sleeping in her arms. The boy had exhausted himself crying and had finally passed out. She wouldn't wake him for this. Whatever happened, at least he'd be spared witnessing it. Carlo Calabrese sat in the front pew, flanked by his soldiers. His expression was unreadable, but Grace saw the calculation in his eyes. He was here because Vincent had promised something he couldn't refuse, the encrypted drive. But there was one more guest Vincent had invited. The church doors opened, and Marcus walked in, not in handcuffs, but free, his FBI credentials clearly visible. Behind him walked a woman Grace recognized from news broadcasts, Director Sarah Chen, head of the FBI's criminal division. Grace's grip on Marco tightened. "Vincent, what?" "Trust me," Vincent murmured. Director Chen approached the altar, her eyes sweeping the assembled criminals with obvious distaste. "Mr. Moretti, you promised information worth my time. This better not be a waste." "It's not." Vincent gestured to Grace. "My fiancée has in her possession an encrypted drive containing evidence of FBI corruption. Names, dates, transactions. 4 years of data compiled by your own agent, Marcus Williams, before his fake death." Every eye in the room turned to Marcus, who stood rigid, his face carefully blank. "The drive proves that several high-ranking FBI officials have been taking money from the Calabrese family in exchange for classified information," Vincent continued. "It also proves that Marcus Williams was aware of this corruption and chose to fake his death rather than report it through proper channels. He became part of the problem." "That's a lie," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Grace spoke for the first time, her voice carrying through the cathedral. She carefully shifted Marco in her arms, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small external drive. "This is what everyone's been hunting. What people died for. Marcus gave it to me 4 years ago, told me to hide it. He said it was insurance." "Insurance against what?" Director Chen asked sharply. "Against the people he was working with," Grace said. The corrupt agents who were protecting the Calabrese family. Marcus wasn't investigating them, he was documenting them so he'd have leverage. So they couldn't betray him without taking themselves down too. Marcus's facade cracked. Grace, don't. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? Grace's voice shook with anger. You used me, Marcus. You used everyone. You weren't some noble agent doing deep cover work. You were playing both sides, collecting evidence to protect yourself while people died. Director Chen stepped forward, hand extended. Give me the drive. No, Vincent said. Not yet. Because that drive is the only thing keeping Grace alive. The moment it's in FBI hands, the Calabrese family has no reason to let her live. She becomes a loose end. Carlo Calabrese spoke for the first time. The boy makes a good point. Grace Williams knows too much. She's seen our faces, heard our names. Even if the drive exposes the corrupt agents protecting us, we still have other assets. The smart play is to eliminate her. Grace felt ice in her veins. Marco stirred in her arms, murmuring in his sleep. Which is why, Vincent said, his voice ringing with authority, we're going to make a deal. All of us. Right here, right now. I don't make deals with criminals, Director Chen said coldly. You will do this. Vincent pulled out his phone, projecting an image onto the white wall behind the altar. It was a document, official, stamped, unmistakable. This is a copy of the encrypted files. I had my people break the encryption last night. What you're seeing is just one transaction, one payment of $500,000 from the Calabrese family to Deputy Director James Morrison. For insider information that led to the death of 3 federal agents. Director Chen's face went pale. Morrison? You're second in command, Vincent confirmed. And he's not the only one. There are 17 more names on that list. 17 FBI officials who've been on the Calabrese payroll for years. The cathedral was silent except for the echo of Vincent's words. Here's my deal, Vincent continued. Grace gives you the drive. You clean house, arrest every corrupt agent, expose the rot in your organization. In exchange, Grace gets full immunity. Her record is expunged, her identity protected. She gets to live her life without looking over her shoulder. And what about the Calabrese family? Carlo asked dangerously. You get something better than protection from federal prosecution, Vincent said. You get me. My organization, my resources, my territory. We end the war. We form an alliance. The Morettis and the Calabrese families united. Between us, we control everything from Chicago to New York. Grace stared at Vincent. An alliance? With the family that had tried to kill them? But she saw the genius in it. The Calabrese family's power came from their FBI connections. Without those, they were vulnerable. An alliance with Vincent would restore their position, give them security. It was the one thing they couldn't refuse. Carlo leaned back, considering. And what do you get out of this, Moretti? Besides keeping your pretty maid alive? My son gets a mother, Vincent said simply. And I get a chance at something I thought I'd lost when Isabella died. I get a family. Marco stirred, his eyes opening. He looked up at Grace, then at his father, sensing the tension in the room. Daddy? Miss Grace? What's happening? Grace kissed his forehead. Something good, baby. Something really good. Director Chen stepped forward. If this information is genuine, if it leads to the arrests you're claiming, then yes, Grace Williams gets immunity. Full protection. But Moretti, her eyes hardened. This doesn't make you a hero. You're still a criminal. I know exactly what I am, Director. But tonight, I'm also a father protecting his family. We all do what we have to do. Carlo stood, approaching the altar. He looked at Grace, then at Vincent. You're asking me to trust that you won't use this alliance to destroy my family from within. I'm asking you to trust that we both want the same thing, stability, power, and the freedom to operate without FBI interference, Vincent corrected. My word, backed by every family boss in this room, that the alliance is genuine. One by one, the other family representatives nodded their agreement. It wasn't about friendship or loyalty, it was about survival. United, they were stronger than divided. Carlo extended his hand. Then we have a deal. Vincent shook it, sealing an alliance that would reshape the criminal underworld of the entire eastern seaboard. Grace handed the drive to Director Chen, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. 4 years. 4 years of running, hiding, looking over her shoulder. And now, finally, it was over. Marcus watched from the side, his face a mask of defeat. Grace, he called out. I really did love you once. Grace looked at him, the man she'd mourned, the man she'd thought she'd spend her life with, and felt nothing but pity. I know. But love without respect, without honesty, without sacrifice, that's not really love at all. It took me losing you to understand what love actually means. She looked at Vincent, who held his hand out to her. She took it, and together, with Marco between them, they walked down the cathedral aisle, past the assembled criminals and law enforcement, past Marcus and his regrets. They walked toward the future. Toward freedom. Toward family. The arrests happened swiftly. Within 72 hours, Director Chen had taken down 17 corrupt FBI officials, including Deputy Director Morrison. The news media exploded with the scandal, the biggest corruption case in Bureau history. Marcus Williams was offered immunity in exchange for his testimony, though his career was effectively over. But for Grace, Vincent, and Marco, those 72 hours were spent somewhere else entirely, a private beach house in the Bahamas, far from the chaos unfolding in the States. Grace stood on the balcony, watching Marco play in the sand below. He'd built an elaborate castle with Vincent's help, both of them covered in sand and laughing. The sound of Marco's joy was the sweetest music Grace had ever heard. You're thinking too hard again, Vincent said, appearing behind her. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. I'm thinking about how close we came to losing everything, Grace admitted. But we didn't. Vincent kissed her temple. We won, Grace. Against the Calabrese family, against the FBI, against your husband. Ex-husband, Grace corrected. The divorce papers were filed yesterday. It'll be final in 6 months. Vincent turned her in his arms, his eyes searching hers. And then? Grace knew what he was asking. And then I become Grace Moretti. If you'll have me. Vincent's smile was blinding. He kissed her, deep, passionate, a kiss that promised forever. When they broke apart, he pulled a small box from his pocket. I was going to wait, he said, opening it to reveal a stunning diamond ring. Make it romantic, perfect. But I've learned that perfect moments are the ones we create, not the ones we plan. Grace Williams, will you marry me? Will you officially become Marco's mother and my wife? Tears streamed down Grace's face. Yes. God, yes. Vincent slid the ring onto her finger, and Grace stared at it, hardly believing this was real. A year ago, she'd been a maid hiding from her past. Now she was engaged to a man she loved, about to become mother to a boy who'd stolen her heart. Daddy. Miss Grace. Come see. Marco's voice called from the beach. They went down together, hand in hand. Marco had finished his castle and stood beside it proudly. Look! I made a room for you, and a room for Daddy, and my room is right in the middle so I can be close to both of you. Grace knelt beside him, pulling him into a hug. It's perfect, baby. So you're really going to marry Daddy? Marco asked, his eyes hopeful. You're really going to be my mom? Really, really, Grace confirmed. Marco threw his arms around her neck. I knew it. I knew if I wished hard enough, it would come true. You're the best mom ever. I haven't even started being your mom yet, Grace laughed through her tears. Yes, you have, Marco said seriously. You've been my mom since the first time you made me breakfast with the smiley-faced strawberries. That's when I knew. Vincent crouched beside them, wrapping his arms around both Grace and Marco. My family, he said softly. My whole world. 6 months later. The Moretti estate, rebuilt after the safe house destruction and enhanced with the newest security, was decorated in white roses and twinkling lights. It was a small wedding by mob standards, attended only by the people who mattered most. Maria, fully forgiven after Antonio confirmed she'd been manipulated without knowing, cried throughout the entire ceremony. Antonio served as Vincent's best man, and 7-year-old Marco, who'd grown 2 inches and gained a confidence Grace barely recognized, stood as Grace's man of honor. Grace wore a simple white dress, elegant and understated. She didn't need elaborate, she needed authenticity. As she walked down the aisle toward Vincent, who waited at the altar with tears in his eyes, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd come to this house broken, hiding, certain she'd never belong anywhere again. She'd found a boy who needed love and a man who needed someone to fight for. She'd discovered that family wasn't about blood, it was about choice, commitment, and the willingness to face danger together. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Marco loudly announced, "If anyone objects, they have to fight me." The gathered guests, hardened criminals and their families, laughed with genuine warmth. Vincent and Grace exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Vincent went first. Grace, you came into my life when I'd forgotten what it meant to feel. You loved my son when he needed it most, and you loved me even when I didn't deserve it. You taught me that strength isn't about walls, it's about letting someone in. I promise to protect you, honor you, and make you smile every day for the rest of our lives. Grace's turn. Vincent, when I met you, I was hiding from the world. You didn't let me hide. You saw me, really saw me, and you chose to stand beside me even when it meant risking everything. You gave me a family, a home, and a reason to stop running. I promise to love you, support you, and be the partner you deserve. And Marco, she looked at her soon-to-be son. I promise to be the mom you wished for. Always. Marco beamed, and Grace saw Vincent's mother's eyes in his, the gentleness, the capacity for joy despite the darkness around them. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant concluded. You may kiss your bride. Vincent pulled Grace close, kissing her as their guests cheered. Marco ran up, throwing his arms around both of them, and the photographer captured the moment, a family, complete at last. The reception was filled with laughter, music, and surprisingly heartfelt speeches. Even Carlo Calabrese attended, his presence a symbol of the alliance that had held strong for 6 months. The criminal underworld had entered a new era of cooperation, and while Vincent remained vigilant, he allowed himself to hope for lasting peace. As the evening wound down, Grace found herself alone on the terrace with Marco, watching fireflies dance across the newly landscaped garden. Are you happy, Mom? Marco asked. He'd started calling her Mom 3 months ago, and it still made Grace's heart soar every time. Happier than I ever thought possible, Grace said honestly. Me too. Marco leaned against her. Sometimes I dream about before, when you were just a maid and I thought you might leave. Those were bad dreams. But then I wake up and remember you're really my mom now, and the bad dreams don't matter anymore. Grace kissed the top of his head. No more bad dreams. Only good ones from now on. Promise? Promise. Vincent appeared, holding 3 glasses, champagne for him and Grace, sparkling cider for Marco. A toast, he said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, to family, into the woman who saved us both. To Mom. Marco added, raising his glass. They clinked glasses as fireworks exploded overhead, Antonio's surprise wedding gift. The sky filled with color, and Grace stood surrounded by her husband and son, watching the light show with wonder. She thought about Marcus, now living in witness protection somewhere, testifying against the corruption he'd helped create. She thought about the woman she'd been, broken, scared, convinced she'd never be whole again. And she thought about the journey that had transformed her from a grieving widow into a wife, mother, and survivor. What are you thinking about? Vincent asked, his arm around her waist. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, Grace said. If Marcus hadn't faked his death, if I hadn't run, if I hadn't ended up as your maid, we wouldn't be here, Vincent finished. The universe works in mysterious ways. Or maybe, Marco interjected wisely, it's just that good things happen to people who deserve them. And you both deserved good things. Grace laughed, pulling him close. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being sad. Well, I'm not sad anymore, Grace said. Neither am I, Vincent added. Me neither, Marco concluded. So I guess that means we all lived happily ever after, right? Grace and Vincent exchanged a look that held understanding, love, and the knowledge that happily ever after wasn't a destination but a choice they made every day. Right, Grace agreed. Happily ever after. And as the fireworks continued to paint the sky with impossible colors, the Moretti family stood together, a mafia boss, an FBI agent's widow, and a little boy whose greatest wish had come true, proving that sometimes, against all odds and logic, love really did conquer all. Even in the darkest corners of the world, light could still find a way in. And once it did, nothing could extinguish it. 1 year later, Grace stood in the kitchen of the Moretti estate, preparing breakfast with practiced ease. Marco, now 8, sat at the island doing his homework, occasionally stealing strawberries from the fruit bowl she'd prepared. Mom, how do you spell family? He asked. Grace smiled, setting down the knife. Family. That's what I thought, but Mrs. Peterson said there are different kinds of spelling for family. Like, the word is the same, but the meaning can be different. What do you mean? Marco looked up, his dark eyes thoughtful. She said some families are made by birth, and some families are made by choice. And both kinds of spelling are correct because both kinds are real. Grace's throat tightened with emotion. Your teacher is very wise. So we're the choice kind, right? You chose to be my mom, and I chose you too. That makes us family. The best kind of family, Grace confirmed. Vincent entered the kitchen, his tie already loosened despite the early hour, and immediately moved to kiss Grace. The domesticity of their life still surprised her sometimes, the way he always sought her out first thing in the morning, the way Marco demanded goodbye hugs before school, the way their house felt full of warmth and laughter instead of cold silence. Antonio called, Vincent said, stealing a piece of toast. The Chicago Tribune wants to do a profile on the Moretti family transformation. How the boss who lost his wife found love again with his son's favorite person. Absolutely not, Grace said immediately. The last thing we need is more media attention. That's what I told him. Vincent grinned. But between you and me, the story writes itself. Mysterious Maid captures the heart of Chicago's most eligible and dangerous widower. It's very Cinderella. Except Cinderella didn't have the FBI, a fake dead husband, and a mob war to deal with, Grace pointed out. Details. Vincent pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. The important part is the ending, where the prince gets the girl, the kingdom finds peace, and everyone lives happily ever after. Marco made gagging sounds. You guys are so mushy. Can we please eat breakfast before I throw up? They laughed, all three of them, and in that moment, Grace understood something profound. This was what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not perfection, not safety, not even happiness in the traditional sense. She'd been searching for belonging. For a place where her past didn't define her. For people who saw her scars and loved her anyway. She'd found it in the most unexpected place, in a mafia boss's mansion, in a little boy's desperate wish, and in her own courage to stop running and start fighting for what she wanted. As they sat down to breakfast together, her husband, her son, her family, Grace sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances. For love that transformed. For the journey that had led her from the depths of despair to this moment of perfect contentment. And when Marco asked, Mom, can you make the smiley face with the strawberries again? Grace smiled and said yes, because that's what mothers did. They made their children smile. They created moments of joy in a world that often felt too dark. They loved fiercely and without reservation. And Grace Williams Moretti, former FBI agent's widow, former woman in hiding, former maid, now wife, now mother, now fully herself, was finally, completely, gloriously home. If this story touched your heart, moved you to tears, or made you believe in second chances, please hit that subscribe button. We create emotional stories like this every week, tales of love, redemption, courage, and the beautiful messiness of being human. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. And who knows? The next story might be exactly what your heart needs to hear. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. Because everyone deserves a story that reminds them they're not alone.